The wind came from the northwest at 31 knots, shifted, dropped to 19, then gusted again without warning. Staff Sergeant Renata Voss had been counting those shifts for 10 hours. She lay in the snow on a ridgeline at 3,200 meters elevation, her body pressed flat against the frozen ground, her cheek resting against the stock of her rifle as though it were something she loved. The temperature had fallen to -29°C 3 hours ago, and had not moved since. Her fingers, the two that mattered most, were numb inside her gloves. She had stopped feeling her toes somewhere around hour 6. The cold had a sound out here. It was not silence. It was a low, structural hum, like something immense tightening. Below her, 4 kilometers and 20 meters away, give or take a breath, a war was ending badly. Forward operating Base Keller sat in a valley bowl carved by a glacier that had retreated 10,000 years ago and taken all mercy with it. The base was a cluster of prefabricated structures, vehicle revetments, and comm towers wrapped in HESCO barriers, adequate fortification against a probe, inadequate against what had arrived at 0340 that morning. 43 fighters from the Karoo Splinter Group had moved into the valley under cover of the blizzard, using the storm the same way Renata was using her white ghillie suit. They were professionals. They had rehearsed this. By the time the base's perimeter guards recognized the contact, 6 of them were already down. What remained of the garrison, 11 soldiers, 2 logistics contractors, and a flight medic named Davis who had not slept in 30 hours, were now consolidated in the main operations building. The Karoo fighters had cut the external comm lines 90 minutes in. The base's satellite terminal had taken a round through its uplink dish at 0510. What was left was a single tactical radio operating on emergency battery power, its signal barely punching through the mountain interference, its transmissions going out into a void that may or may not contain anyone listening. Renata was listening. She had been on this ridge since before the attack began. That was not a coincidence, and it was not a sanctioned mission. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, she watched the valley with the patience of something geological. The fighters moved in disciplined 2-man elements. They rotated positions, kept heads down, communicated with hand signals. Their commander, she had identified him in the first 2 hours by his movement patterns, the way he moved counterclockwise when he consolidated his elements, the way he always checked left before speaking, was a man in a tan cold-weather jacket who had not made a mistake yet. He will, she thought. They always do when they think it's over. The radio in her earpiece crackled, faint, fragmented. If anyone is receiving, we have 11 personnel requesting immediate static. Cannot hold past. Then nothing. She exhaled slowly. The shot she needed was 4,020 meters. The longest confirmed sniper kill on record, at the time she had memorized such things, was just under 3,540 meters Canadian Forces, Afghanistan. She had read the report 3 times. She had done the math on the conditions, the round, the elevation. She had thought about it the way some people think about theoretical limits. She had never imagined she would need to exceed it. The thought did not frighten her. Fear was a thing she had learned to file carefully, like paper in a drawer. You did not throw it away, you needed it, but you did not let it sit on the desk while you were trying to work. She breathed. The mountain hummed. Below her, someone in the operations building fired a 3-round burst from a window and immediately drew 3 times the fire in return. She watched the muzzle flashes, counted positions, updated her mental map. 11, she confirmed. 3 on the north approach, 4 on the east, split into 2 pairs. 2 at the vehicle revetment, 2 mobile. And the commander, standing 40 meters back from the wire, watching. She had been watching him for 10 hours. She was going to have to make a decision very soon. Inside FOB Keller's operations building, Captain Leonard Marsh was running out of options in alphabetical order. He had already exhausted A through most of the letters. Air support, unavailable. The nearest airframe was 300 kilometers away and the ceiling was too low. Backup comms, destroyed. Casualties, 4 Kia, 3 WIA, 1 critical. Defensive perimeter, contracted to the building itself. Emergency extraction, not possible. The only LZ was under direct fire. He was now somewhere around S. Surrender. He stood against the wall away from the windows, his back to the plywood, his rifle across his chest, and he looked at the faces around him. Specialist Kowalski had a pressure bandage on his thigh and was still upright. Sergeant Torres was reloading with the mechanical calm of someone who had gone past fear into a different country. The 2 contractors, a 26-year-old logistics tech named Brennan and a 53-year-old former Marine named Hoyt, who had been hired to fix generators, were stacked at opposite windows, neither of them saying anything. Hoyt had not missed a shot. The flight medic, Davis' first name Cassandra, which she hated, was working on Corporal Reyes in the corner, her headlamp cutting a focused beam through the dim interior. She had been working on Reyes for 40 minutes. She did not look up. Marsh checked the time. Ling Louis Ba. Full daylight in 40 minutes. They'll push when it's light, Torres said quietly. It was not a question. Yes, Marsh said. He had been in the army for 14 years. He had done a lot of things in those 14 years, and he had not died doing any of them, which he recognized as largely a matter of probability. He tried to think about the math of the current situation and found the math unfavorable. 43 trained fighters against 11 defenders, one of whom was critical, and a medic who could not leave her patient. The radio crackled again. Marsh picked it up. Pressed transmit. Any station, this is Fob Keller, actual, declaring emergency. Grid. He gave the grid. Repeated it. 40+ Karoo fighters. We cannot hold past first light. Any station, please respond. Static. Then, very faint, very clean, a single transmission. Keller actual. I have your grid. I'm working. Marsh stared at the radio. The voice was a woman's. Level as a carpenter's rule. No call sign, no unit identifier, no protocol. Just, I'm working. Torres looked at him. Who was that? Kowalski asked from the floor. Marsh did not know. He pressed transmit again. Station, identify yourself. No response. He looked at the window. At the darkness outside that was just beginning to dilute at its edges. At the fighters moving in their patient, professional patterns. Someone is up there, he thought. He did not know if that was reason for hope or something else entirely. The cold had arrived in stages, like a methodical enemy. First it had taken her feet. That had happened in hour 3. A gradual theft pins and needles, then a buzzing, then an absence. She had anticipated it. She had layered correctly, vapor barrier socks inside mountaineering boots, boot heaters that had died at hour 5, but had bought her enough time. The feet were gone, but they were not dangerous yet. She catalogued them and moved on. Hour 5, the cold had taken her left shoulder. Not temperature, something structural. She had been motionless for so long that the tendons were seizing, and the weight of the rifle was applying a constant, subtle stress to the joint that had become, over 5 hours, a significant pain. She breathed through it, adjusted her support hand by 2 millimeters. The pain shifted from sharp to dull and manageable. Hour 7, the cold had tried for her mind. That was the fight she had expected least and prepared for most. It came as arithmetic. Not doubt. Doubt was an emotion, and she had filed doubt in the drawer. This was computational. Her mind began presenting her with numbers that did not favor success. The distance, 4,020 meters, measured by her laser rangefinder, confirmed twice. The laser position during the 40-minute window in hour 1 before she had gone completely still. The wind, averaging 22 knots with variance of plus or minus 12, gusting in patterns she had categorized but could not fully predict. The temperature, affecting powder burn rate, affecting air density, affecting every calculation she had made in training and would need to recalculate now. The time of flight for a round at this distance, approximately 5 seconds. 5 seconds during which the wind was an independent variable. 5 seconds during which God, or whatever managed the wind, could simply decide to change things. Her mind ran these numbers and reached a probability she did not like. She ran the numbers again. Same answer. She breathed 4 counts in, hold 2, 4 counts out, and looked at the number from a different direction. The question was not, what is the probability of success? The question was, what is the cost of not trying? She had learned that reframe from a man named Specialist Aaron Dewey, who had been her spotter for 3 years and her closest friend for 4, and who had been dead for 12 years. Aaron Dewey had been 24 when he died, which meant he had been dead for half her life and still occupied somehow more mental real estate than most living people. You're doing math again, she could hear him say. The way he always said it, not accusatory, just observational, like noting the weather. You know what the math says. Stop running it. Run the shot. Hour 8, she had caught herself beginning to shiver and had caught it in time. Shivering was a physiological response she could control, but only barely, and only with aggressive concentration. She tightened her core, forced her breathing into a longer cycle, and generated warmth through deliberate, invisible muscular tension. Not movement, tension. The difference between those two things was the difference between being seen and not being seen, and being seen out here meant being dead, which was a waste of 10 hours. Hour 9, the light had started changing. She had watched it happen the way she had watched everything. Precisely, without sentiment. The absolute black of the mountain night softening into the dark blue of pre-dawn. stars going out one by one in the east. The valley below beginning to acquire dimension and depth as shapes separated from shadows. By hour 10 she could see everything she needed to see. And she was thinking about Aaron Dewey, because this valley was where he had died, and today was the day he had died. And she had been in this exact valley once before, 12 years ago, lying in the snow with a rifle, when she had made a decision that had haunted every single day since. It had not been called Fobkeller then. It had been a much smaller position, a patrol base, really, 4 structures and a radio, manned by a 12-person reconnaissance element that had been compromised 3 days into their mission when a local source turned and reported their position. What happened next was fast and catastrophic and had the quality of something that could not be stopped once it started. 27 fighters had descended on the patrol base in darkness. Renata Voss had been 1,900 meters out on a hillside, a different hillside, the southern ridge, lower elevation, working as the team's overwatch. Her spotter was Aaron Dewey. They had been in position since 2200, watching the patrol base, watching the valley, watching nothing happen, and then watching everything happen at once. She had identified the attack's command element at approximately the same time the first shots were fired at the base. A single individual orchestrating the flanking movements, positioned at the tree line, 1,900 meters. Conditions: light wind, good visibility, known distance. A shot she had made in training at 2,100 meters. She had hesitated, 0.2 of a second. She measured it later, in her memory, with the precision of someone trying to understand where a failure begins. Not doubt she knew the shot was makeable, not fear, something more complex. A resistance at the moment of crossing from preparation into action, a gap between, I can do this, and I am doing this, that she had never encountered before in training, and has never been able to fully name since. 0.2 of a second. The command element had stepped behind a boulder. He had reappeared 11 seconds later, but by then the situation had changed. 2 of her own team members had moved into her line of fire, running toward cover, and the shot was gone. She had found it again 18 minutes later and taken it, and the shot had been on target. And by then it was over, and Aaron Dewey was among the 4 members of the element who had not made it to the casualty collection point. She had not been reprimanded. The after-action review had categorized it as a tactical situation that exceeded overwatch capability given force ratios. The report was accurate. The report missed the point entirely. She had been given a combat infantryman's equivalent award, a Purple Heart for the round that had caught her in the right calf during the exfil, and a new assignment. She had accepted all 3 without speaking much. For 12 years, she had not been back to this valley. She had not avoided it, she had simply not been assigned here. She had deployed 6 times in those 12 years, to different mountains, different deserts, different contexts, and she had never hesitated again. Not once. The 0.2 of a second had been burned out of her, cauterized by the knowledge of what it cost. She had become, by the assessment of every commander who had evaluated her, perhaps the most reliable trigger puller in her branch. Not the most gifted, though she was gifted, but the most reliable. The one who, when the conditions were met and the decision was made, simply did not flinch. But she had never come back here. Until 2 weeks ago, when her unit had been tasked to this region for a rotation she had not requested and had not declined. She had driven through this valley on the road. She had looked at the southern ridge. She had felt something that she did not have a clean word for. And 3 days ago, when the intelligence assessment had flagged a Karoo buildup north of the valley and the SIGINT analysts had modeled an attack probability of 63% in the next 72 hours, she had done something that was technically not authorized and was entirely her own decision. She had filed for a personal leave day. She had told her section sergeant she was taking a personal day. She had drawn her personal weapon, not a unit weapon, her personally owned precision rifle, a custom-built 338 Lapua Magnum that she had spent 4 years building and 8 years shooting, loaded it into a soft case, packed her cold weather kit, and walked out of the FOB before dawn. She had been in position on the northern ridge before the Koru element crossed the valley floor. The math of why she had done this was simple. She was not going to hesitate again. His name, she would learn later, was Vaslan Omarov. He was 41 years old. He had been a military officer in a previous life, in a different country that no longer existed in the same form. He had fought in 3 wars by the time he was 30, and had survived all 3 through a combination of competence and the kind of luck that follows competence at a distance. He was, by every metric she could observe through the scope, exceptional at his work. He moved with economy, he communicated with efficiency. He positioned his elements with textbook understanding of fields of fire and mutual support. He had not exposed himself carelessly once in 10 hours. except for one a bit. Every 30 to 45 minutes, he walked to a specific point at the northeast corner of his perimeter just behind the berm where his two mobile fighters staged, and he looked north. He did not do it for long, 15 to 20 seconds. But he did it consistently, and it was the only time in his movement pattern when he was not using terrain as cover, when he was standing at something like full height, looking out at the valley that surrounded him. She did not know why he did this. He might have been doing a personal radio check on a frequency she could not monitor. He might have been looking for reinforcements. He might have been watching the mountains the same way all soldiers watch mountains for what they might conceal. Whatever the reason, it was a pattern. And patterns in this work were the same as weaknesses. She had noted it in hour 2. She had been waiting for it since hour 9. The light in the valley was now sufficient. Not full daylight, the sun was still behind the eastern peaks, but the ambient light had reached the level where she could read faces in the scope at 300 meters. At 4,000 meters, she could read silhouettes, mass, position. She watched the northeast corner. He was due. She had tracked 6 iterations. Average interval, 38 minutes. Last appearance, 34 minutes ago. She began her preparation. Not movement, she did not move. Preparation was internal. She ran the calculations one final time, not because they would change, but because the act of running them was itself stabilizing. It was how she moved from the conceptual space into the operational one, the last step across the gap she had once fallen into. Distance, 4,020 meters. Confirmed. Elevation difference, -80, 3 meters. The target position was below her. Ballistic data for her round A, 338 Lapua Magnum, 300, Grain Sierra Match King, loaded to 2,700 feet per second at the muzzle. At this distance and temperature, she expected approximately 41.8 meters of bullet drop. She had dialed her elevation turret accordingly, confirming 0 drift over the previous 6 hours by observing the scope's repeatability across reference points in the valley. Wind, the primary challenge. Current reading at her position, 24 knots, northwest. She had 3 reference points in the valley below, a fixed flag at the base perimeter, the movement behavior of loose material near the vehicle revetment, the behavior of smoke from a fire that one of the Karoo fighters had built behind the northern berm 2 hours ago. The valley wind was running approximately 18 knots at surface level, approximately northwest, with variation. The significant unknown was the mid-course wind at altitude, between her position and the valley floor, where the air pressure differentials created by the mountain terrain could produce behavior she could not directly observe. She had been building a mental model of that mid-course behavior for 10 hours. It was, in the end, a model, not a certainty. There was no certainty at 4,020 meters. There was only precision in every variable she could control and acceptance of the variables she could not. Time of flight at this distance and velocity, approximately 5.1 seconds. In 5.1 seconds, a human being could take 3 steps, turn around twice, or simply stand still. The objective was the last option. She controlled her breathing. She needed him to stand still for 5 seconds. The scope's reticle was a first focal plane mil-dot. At maximum magnification, 25 power, the target zone appeared to her as a circle of clarity approximately 12 meters in diameter at that distance, every detail inside it reduced to the essentials: shape, mass, position. The reticle itself was hair-fine. The crosshairs, perfectly centered, represented a point of impact that would, if all variables resolved as calculated, strike a human-sized target at 4,020 meters within approximately 30 centimeters of center. 30 centimeters was the margin. She thought of it as generous and unforgiving simultaneously. Her right eye was open. Her left eye was relaxed, neither closed nor artificially forced. She had trained past the habit of squinting. Both eyes received light. Only one processed the scope image. The distinction mattered over long sessions because eye fatigue in the scope eye was cumulative, and she had been at this scope for 10 hours, and her eye was tired in the specific way that high magnification optics created tiredness, not pain, but a subtle softening of focus that she was managing, by blinking in controlled intervals, and by shifting her sight picture to a neutral reference point every 12 minutes. Her breathing was currently running at a 6-second cycle, in for 3, out for 3. She would shift to a 4 count in the moments before the shot, the classic shooter's breath control, where the trigger is pressed in the natural respiratory pause between exhale and the diaphragm's next involuntary cycle. That pause lasted approximately 2 to 3 seconds in a trained shooter. It was the window. Her heart rate was sitting at approximately 52 beats per minute, which she knew not from a monitor but from experience. She could feel her pulse in her fingertip where it rested outside the trigger guard, a very slight, very regular pressure. She needed it below 50. She breathed. 48. Good. Down in the valley, the Karoo fighters were beginning their pre-dawn consolidation. She could read the movement pattern. They were preparing for the push, a final assault before the day fully arrived, before airframes could theoretically be scrambled, before whatever meager chance of outside help existed could materialize. It was the correct tactical decision given their situation. She would have made the same one. They had perhaps 20 minutes. Come on, she thought, with no urgency in the thought, only request. Come to your corner. Through the scope, she saw him stand. He moved exactly as he had moved 5 times before. She had watched this walk so many times that she could have described it to someone who had never seen him, the slight forward lean he carried from an old injury, the way his left hand always moved toward his coat pocket before settling at his side, the particular rhythm of his stride that was slightly longer on the right than the left. She knew his walk the way she knew the wind. He reached the northeast corner. He turned north. He stood. She was already in the natural respiratory pause. The reticle was settled. Not perfectly still, nothing was perfectly still at 10 power and a 10-hour hold, but it was within the acceptable cone. She had made the wind correction in her scope's windage turret. 2.4 mil left. The elevation was set. Every adjustable variable was locked. What remained was the moment. She thought of Aaron Dewey, not consciously. She did not summon his memory as a ritual or an invocation. He simply appeared, the way he had appeared every day for 12 years in the unguarded moments between intent and action, his face, which had been ordinary and specific the way only actual faces are, with a scar through his left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident, and the habit of looking slightly to the right of whoever he was talking to when he was really listening. Run the shot, he had said. Not, do it for me. Not, avenge me. Not anything poetic. Run the shot. She pressed the trigger. The recoil was familiar. She rode it, controlled the muzzle rise, reacquired the scope picture within 0.8 seconds, a trained response, not a choice, and watched the target zone. The round was in the air. She could not see it. No one could. But she could calculate its position at any given moment from the time of press, the way a navigator calculates a ship's position from last known coordinates and heading and speed. The round was traveling at approximately 2,700 feet per second at the muzzle, bleeding velocity against the air, its trajectory a very slight parabola, its path affected at every moment by the air it passed through. 1 second out. Still above the valley floor, approximately 2,000 meters from the target, moving. 2 seconds. Crossing the midpoint, beginning the steeper portion of its descent curve, the wind now applying its full lateral correction or its revision of her correction, which was the variable she could not control. 3 seconds. Below the ridgeline of the valley's eastern wall, entering the surface, layer wind. The 18-knot northwest flow she had measured from her reference points. 4 seconds. She did not breathe. 4.7 seconds. Through the scope, she saw Vasilin Omarov's head turn slightly, as though he had heard something approaching from a direction he had not expected. 5.1 seconds. The impact. She watched through the scope. She watched without moving, without reacting, without any visible change to her position or her expression. She was a woman lying in snow on a ridge at 3,200 meters, and she was watching, and what she saw in the next 30 seconds would either confirm or correct everything she had spent 10 hours building. Vasilin Omarov went down. Not dramatically, not the way movement in film presents death. He simply stopped being vertical and became horizontal, and the 2 mobile fighters near him took a half-second to process what had happened, a half-second that looked, even at 4,020 meters, exactly like human disbelief. And then they dropped to the ground, scanning, because there was no sound yet. The report of her rifle would arrive several seconds after the bullet, sound, traveling at 1/3, the bullet's speed, and then the report arrived at the valley floor. A flat, dry crack that echoed off the western wall and came back distorted. She saw the reaction as a wave. The 2 mobile fighters went flat. The pair at the vehicle revetment went flat. The 3 on the north approach went flat. The 4 on the east, in their 2 pairs, went flat. 42 fighters simultaneously pressing their faces into the dirt, scanning for an origin point, finding nothing because she was at 4,020 meters on a white ridge in a white ghillie suit, and she had fired once and was now still again, indistinguishable from the snow and the wind. The valley was not quiet. The valley was actually loud voices, movement, the mechanical sounds of confusion. But through the scope, With the distance transforming sound into pantomime, it had the quality of silence, actions without audio. Ava tableau, frozen at its hinge point. She watched the northeast corner. No one went to him. Two fighters moved toward him at a crouch, got within 5 meters, saw what had happened, and withdrew. She watched the communications that followed hand signals, the visible evidence of a command structure processing the removal of its head. She watched the hesitation move through the positions like a current. In the operations building, something was happening. Lights electric, emergency moving in the windows. Voices, probably. She could not hear them. She reached for her radio with the arm that was not her shooting arm, moving it slowly enough to remain beneath any observer's threshold, and pressed transmit. Keller actual. Target is down. Your north approach is compromised. Push your east window in the next 3 minutes, before they reorganize. Recommend immediate. A pause. Then Marsh's voice, with the quality of someone recalibrating an entire set of assumptions. Who is this? Someone who's been out here for a while, she said. 3 minutes. She did not wait for a response. She watched the east wall of the operations building, where, 64 seconds later, the window came out and 3 soldiers dropped to the ground and moved into the gap between the Karug positions, which were still flattened, still scanning, still one command decision behind the moment, with a speed and violence that comes from people who have been waiting in one room for 4 hours with nothing left to do but want to move. She watched it resolve. It took 11 minutes. She was found at 0847. The search element, 2 soldiers and the flight medic Davis, who had been the first one through the east window, and who had not in fact slept in 36 hours at that point, had backtracked the shot's probable origin using a combination of the acoustic report, the angle of impact, and the testimony of a Kourou prisoner who had been alive and cooperative. They found her on the north ridge, in her position, not unconscious but not fully present either. She was hypothermic. Not critically, her core temperature was 34.1 Celsius, 2 degrees below normal, her body having burned through its thermal reserves somewhere in the final 2 hours and begun to compromise in the ways the body compromises when it has nothing left to give and keeps giving anyway. She was responsive to verbal commands. She knew her name, the date, her unit. She did not seem to feel the cold anymore. Davis, who was 28 years old and had not thought herself easily surprised, took one look at the position, the impressions in the snow, the sustained, motionless compression over exactly one body length, the fired brass casing sitting in the snow beside her, and understood without needing it, explained that whoever this woman was, she had been here long before anyone had radioed for help. They wrapped her in emergency blankets. One of the soldiers started a chemical heat pack and tucked it against her. Davis put in an IV for fluid resuscitation and started the warming protocol. Renata Voss accepted all of this with the cooperation of someone very tired. She was lying on the litter when one of the soldiers, Specialist Kowalski, who had driven up here on a bad leg from a stretcher because he had said he was going and Marsh had not argued, looked down at her and asked, because he was 22 years old, and had not learned yet which questions to not ask. "Ma'am, how long were you up here?" "Since 2200, she said. Her voice was rougher than usual, cold-dried. Kowalski did a calculation. His face did something. "That's 10 hours before the attack started. So you were here before he stopped himself. Then, why?" She did not answer immediately. Davis, working on the IV line, did not look up but was very clearly listening. Renata turned her head slightly, not to look at Kowalski, but toward the valley below, which was now filling with light, the sun having finally cleared the eastern peaks and laying itself across the snow in long, cold sheets. "I had something to come back for," she said. Kowalski did not know what that meant. Davis, who was a medic and spent most of her professional life inferring the things people could not say directly, thought she understood the shape of it, if not the details. It was Davis who found the photograph. She found it while cutting away the outer layer of Renata's jacket to assess core temperature, a practical action, not an intrusive one. The photograph was in the breast pocket, military-issue clear plastic sleeve, black and white, slightly worn at the edges from handling. 2 people, a man and a woman, both young, both in uniform, sitting on some kind of equipment case with mountains behind them. The woman was recognizably Renata, 12 years younger, with the same economy of expression but something less settled in her eyes, some ongoing negotiation visible in her face that was no longer there. The man beside her had a scar through his left eyebrow, and the posture of someone who was listening carefully to whoever was holding the camera. Davis looked at the photograph for a moment, then tucked it carefully back into the pocket. She sealed the jacket. She did not say anything, and she did not ask. FOB Bravo's medical facility was 27 kilometers from the valley, And it was not a hospital in any civilian sense of the word, 2 examination rooms, a surgical bay with 1 table, a 4-bed recovery ward. But it had heating, which was the specific luxury Renata required, and it had a window that faced north, which she discovered when she woke at 1,340. She lay still for 30 seconds after waking, running a systems check. Core temperature. Normal. She could tell from the absence of the deep tissue shivering that had been continuous, she realized. For the last several hours on the ridge she had not felt it there, the body's thermostat running so far below threshold that the signal had gone quiet, but she felt its absence now. Her feet were present again. That was good. Her shoulder ached with the specific eloquence of a joint that had been held in one position too long, a pain she was familiar with and not concerned about. Her right eye was raw, the scope eye, standard. She turned her head to the window. Snow was falling, not the aggressive, horizontal assault of the previous night's blizzard, but the ordinary kind, vertical, unhurried, the snowflakes large and distinct in the windless cold, each one falling at the same speed as every other, the whole thing with the quality of something performed very carefully. She watched it fall the way she had watched the valley for 10 hours, with the same quality of attention that she brought to everything, complete and without the editorial addition of meaning. But she was aware of the date. March 15. 12 years ago on March 15, Aaron Dewey had come off a helicopter at FOB Winslow and had been listed, after 3 days of being listed as missing, as killed in action. She had not been at FOB Winslow. She had been in a hospital herself, dealing with the calf wound, and she had found out by message, which was the worst way to find out things. She had not, in the years since, made a ritual of the date. She was not someone who lit candles or held ceremonies. She had her own way of carrying things which was internal and not particularly visible, and which she had developed in the absence of any great facility for external mourning. But she had been aware of this date for months, and she had been aware, for months, of the fact that this deployment would put her in this valley on this date. And she had thought about what that proximity meant, and she had arrived at the conclusion that it meant she should do exactly what she had done, not as a tribute, not as performance, simply because there was a thing to be done and she was the person who could do it, and today was the day. Captain Marsh came to see her at 1,600. He was a tall man, early 40s, with the careful movement of someone managing a back problem. He stood at the foot of her bed with his patrol cap in his hands, turning it slightly, and he said, "I wanted to say it in person." She waited. "You saved 11 people," he said. 14, counting the contractors and Davis. "You also." He stopped, reorganized. "What you did was not within any authorization I can identify. Technically, you were on personal leave. I have no idea how to write any of this." "I don't need you to write it," she said. "I know." He looked at the window. "Who was here before? In this valley?" It was a specific question. She had not said anything to him about the history, and she had not said anything to Kowalski, and she was not sure how he had arrived at the question. Perhaps simply through the logic of what she had done, why a person would spend 10 unauthorized hours on a frozen ridge, without a spotter, without air cover, without any instruction, and the fact that the only explanation that resolved the logic was a personal one. She considered the question. "My spotter," she said. 12 years ago. Marsh nodded. He did not say he was sorry, which she appreciated. It was too late for condolence, and he seemed to understand that. "Was he good?" Marsh asked. She looked at the snow falling past the window. "He was the best listener I've ever worked with," she said. "In the scope you're always measuring, always quantifying. He had a way of knowing when I was in my head and when I was actually present. He could tell the difference from my breathing, from the way I held." She paused. "He would have known I was about to hesitate that night before I knew it myself, if he'd been alive to tell me." The room held that for a moment. "The shot today," Marsh said quietly. "I looked at the distance. My math puts it at just over 4,000 meters. 4,020, she said. "That's." He did not finish the sentence. Then, "How?" She thought about the question. "You do the math," she said. "You control what you can control. And then you stop calculating and you run the shot." Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he put his patrol cap back on, straightened it, and nodded once the nod of a man who recognized that he was in the presence of something he did not fully understand but was going to respect anyway. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll figure out the paperwork." He left. She turned back to the window. The snow was still falling, patient, unhurried, filling in the places where the wind had scoured the ground bare, settling into the low places, the hollows, the impressions left by things that had been present and were present no longer. She reached into the breast pocket of the jacket that hung on the chair beside the bed and took out the photograph. She looked at it the way she had looked at it on many other evenings, in many other quiet rooms, with the particular attention she gave to things she had memorized so completely that looking at them was no longer about acquiring new information but about something else, something she did not have a technical term for. Erin Dewey looked at a point slightly to her right. Listening, she held the photograph in both hands for a moment. Then she set it on the bedside table, facing the window, so it faced the snow. "I didn't hesitate," she said. The snow fell. The room held its silence with the particular quality of a place where something has been put down after being carried a very long time, not empty but relieved. The weight still shaped the air, the way a hand shapes a piece of clay, and the impression persists after the hand has moved on. But the carrying was done, and what remained was simply the impression, and the quiet, and the snow coming down past a window in a small room in a mountain-forward operating base where 14 people were alive who had not expected to be. She closed her eyes. She did not think about the distance. She did not run the numbers. She slept. Outside, on the white slopes of the northern ridge, the wind had moved through and taken the surface snow with it, erasing the impressions, filling the long, narrow hollow where a body had lain for 10 hours. By morning, you would not be able to tell anyone had been there. The mountain does not keep records. It does not need to.